Hi, everyone. It's Deb Blum here, and I am here today with a good friend of mine, Michael McDonald. Hi,
Hello.
Michael. How are you today?
Good. Really glad to be here.
I am so glad you're here. So I'll just set a little context on us that we have known each other for a while now. It's been like 8 years, I think, because
Wow. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. So we went to a training
Mhm.
program together, a life coach training program in San Francisco. And then we've known each other since in many different ways. I've been in your programs and I've been
Mhm.
coached by you. I've had the um, great honor of being one of your clients. And then now I just get to see your amazing wisdom that you share on Facebook and think of you often. So, but just real quick, just to set the context that you are a coach, an integrity coach. And yeah, and I think that's great. And that you, um, when I think about you, I think of you as a person who cares deeply about integrity, authenticity, intimacy, consciousness, leadership. Those are some of the things that I think of when I think of Michael McDonald.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
also see you as like, a chief edge pusher. Like you're the things that you post, they're always they like make my brain hurt a little bit, but in a good way.
Had many clients compare it to the movie Inception.
Mm. That's funny. That's funny. Okay, well there you go. It's a little bit like that. Yeah,
Mhm.
but it's a good thing. And you, what I love is that you post things that are, they just make me, it's like it catches me a little bit off guard. But it's something that I feel shifts me a little bit. So that's what I'm hoping for people today when they listen to us talk. All right, so why don't we just jump right in?
Let's go
And
for it.
yeah, so I liked the idea of starting in this place around certainty and uncertainty, because that's the world that we're living in. We're recording right now on April 9th. And so we're right in the midst of this pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. People are having their worlds rocked in a lot of ways. And one of the biggest things that people are facing is the ultimate of uncertainty. People are forced to, they're being told that they're in lockdown for an undetermined amount of time. It's unclear. It's a novel virus. People don't know exactly what's going to happen with it. We don't exactly know what the way out is. And then that's just a couple of examples of places where people are faced with uncertainty. So I thought maybe you could share with us a little bit of Michael wisdom on uncertainty and how to navigate that.
Yeah, and it's certainly relevant to the times, and that actually has me wondering. It's like this conversation. How well will this conversation? How relevant will this conversation be a year from now, 2 years from now? Where chances are we're going to be still talking about certainty and uncertainty in a completely different context.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm mostly excited about everything that's happening right now, like fascinated with everything that's unfolding. In many ways, celebrating the amount of uncertainty while having a great deal of compassion, because there's a lot of people who are hurting right now. There's a lot of people who are suffering and horrible things are happening, and they're really they're really freaking out about not having the certainty that they thought was certain.
Hmm.
And I think one of the golden opportunities that this exhibits is that most of the things that people are freaking out about, most of the things where they feel like they've lost control or that they've lost the certainty that they're supposed to have, means that they never really had that in the first place.
Hmm.
What they thought was solid ground was actually a false ground.
Hmm.
And there's the opportunity that excites me is the opportunity for all these people who are realizing it's like, oh wait, actually that could just disappear in a moment. they might start to find another actual ground. And certainly there's going to be a lot of people who are just going to be scrambling. They're going to be fighting. And there's going to be a lot of people who are just trying to get through it and trying to weather the storm and trying to be resilient. Some of them will succeed and they'll sort of pop back into their mindset that they had beforehand. But there's some people, whether through their own personal experience or just seeing the experiences of others, will realize like, oh, like I can't uh, guarantee that I'm going to be able to go out and connect with people in person. I can't guarantee that my job, my industry is going to be fine no matter what. I can't guarantee that my loved ones are always going to be around.
Mm.
I can't even guarantee my own health or my own life.
Mm-hmm.
Like what else, like what actually is fluid and not under my control? What are all the things that I thought I controlled that I actually don't?
Mm-hmm.
And what excites me about that is when they start to, when they like have the courage or are forced by circumstances to look past what they thought they had control over, they might start to glimpse that there is a space there that actually is reliable.
Mm.
Like there is still something that's pure and cannot be hurt and never goes away. Like this spiritual ground, the spiritual feeling. And it's not really a rational place. It's not really a place that you can use or a tool or something you can do in order to like make yourself control the world.
Right.
But there is a sense of peace available to people when they choose the direction of, instead of fighting against everything that's going on, being with everything that's going on and having a deeper realization of what's really going on. Where's their experience really coming from? What's really possible?
Wow. So, it's so fascinating. I feel a little hesitant to jump in on this so quickly because it feels like it just feels like there's no warm up for people, but it's good. It's good. That's exactly what I want is like,
Like
well,
straight to the meat of it.
I know, well, it's like really, it's really, for me, it's something that um, when we talk about this, it brings up for me that I feel like in some ways there's a way that people have characterized life in one way that is so limiting, and it's such like this like life looks like this. Life is right. Life is like I'm this human being and I do these things. I go to work and I have children or I don't have children, but whatever it is, though, like a defined, this is what life is. And I think what you're saying is that there's like this other way that like what's really happening. So there's this like this veneer of what looks like it's happening, and that's where we're trying to have control and certainty, and we have like a certain type of things that we do in a day, but that there's actually another thing happening at the same time, and that might actually be what life really is.
uh, yeah, like so many people have lived these lives of just sort of like in a capsule, focusing on what now seem to be small, kind of ridiculous issues, like office politics or like this or that, or like things within their job, but now the job is going away. People are waking up to how interconnected we all are,
Mm,
waking up to the systems that are either there or not there in order to support us, how much we actually rely on each other, and also like how much of this world and how much of our systems are totally made up.
mm-hmm,
Like there's like all these, the financial systems and the organization, like all the different some of them are super affected, some of them are not. Realizing this, yeah, we've just sort of made up that's like, okay, I'm going to do this and you're going to do this, but in these circumstances we're just throwing a lot of that out the window. It's like, okay, how can we help people survive this and also try to get back to some semblance of like the financial systems working, during this and after this. And realizing that that's all in flux and that's all kind of made up, which doesn't mean that we get rid of it, but it's not as fixed or real or like as we thought it was. Then there's like, this is what's underneath it, where, okay, what is constant? What is true? There's a certain appeal to hitting rock bottom for people.
Mm.
I definitely wouldn't recommend it as like the number one strategy. It's like, let me just like have as much horrible things as possible happen to me, or maybe pick an addiction to hit rock bottom on. But it's not that they actually, it's not that things get as bad as they can. It's that things get bad enough for someone to actually look in a different direction than they've looked before.
Mm.
And that's what's happening for a lot of people right now. It doesn't take what other people might consider to be rock bottom. You don't have to have someone die. You don't have to like wake up on the floor after like, but you don't have to have a Byron Katie experience, but
Right. That's what I thought
just,
when you said it. Yeah.
yeah, like just enough to like, I know it's just like, I give up. I've failed. And then they're like, huh, wait a second. I'm still breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Or they just look over as like, but they have the same problems that I have and they seem fine.
Mm.
There's suddenly room when someone gets so extreme, there's some sort of breakdown, then there's room for them to see something new.
Mm.
There's actually, and that's in that realm of like uncertainty, which everyone is running away from. They're trying to patch up and avoid the uncertainty, sort of like a sinking ship, until you find out that actually you can breathe underwater.
Mm.
And then you have a whole new world that you didn't even know that you had access to.
Yeah. That's really great because I think that that's so what you're saying, there are a couple of things in there that are helpful. First of all, that rock bottom, first of all, even just acknowledging that there is something attractive to that for people, that there's some way that like hitting rock bottom is it's like a way to be able to justify choosing another path. You know, it's like a way, whether it's justifying to yourself or justifying to others.
Hmm.
What were you going to say to
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. It's just like, yeah, that's right. Sometimes people just need a good excuse.
Yeah.
Um, an excuse to tell a different story, especially if there's a bit of people pleasing, which most people have trouble with that. Um, hey, like coronavirus is a great excuse to do pretty much anything. Like if there's some change you want to make in your life, here's a great excuse. Like, oh, well, sorry, coronavirus. Or
Yeah.
because of coronavirus, I've decided to do this. Like
Yeah.
that excuse you've been waiting for has arrived. And it's a very socially acceptable excuse.
Yeah.
People
People,
won't fault you.
but people won't fault you. They're kind of expecting a little bit of that to happen right now because, you know, whether it be as kind of mundane as like I know a lot of people who are dyeing their hair different colors, you know, and whether it's like that or it's something really huge, like a huge shift. But like I've heard moms tell me that the reason why they don't stop drinking is because it's their social life, and that it would really disrupt their entire social life to stop drinking. That's an amazing, like that's a hard place to be in your life where, you know, you so want to
Yeah.
do something but you don't make that change because there's some other barrier to you making that change,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so here's a situation where you do get to you do get to do that. But the other thing you said that I think is powerful is that rock bottom looks different for everybody, and it doesn't have to be the rock bottom that you might think of. You know, rock bottom is really the moment in time when things got bad enough, as you said, they're just bad enough that you're willing to look in a different corner or look in a different way.
Yeah. For some people, rock bottom is bored.
Mm.
They're at home, they're fine health wise, financially. People in the world are fine. Um, they're not able to do as much work as they usually identify with doing. And they no longer have any exciting options for what to do. And they sit with
Mm.
that. Like that, for some people, that's rock bottom right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
and for others, And it's, yeah, like, and sometimes rock bottom might pass by so quickly that you might not even notice. I'm
Mm,
realizing, because there might be some people where they even have like loved ones who have passed away, like people who have died as a result of getting this illness, and realizing that they're actually okay with it. They're actually able to roll with it,
mm,
and because they have like this greater perspective, because they're operating from this higher level, more interconnected, this high level of consciousness, where it doesn't seem as personal. It doesn't seem as permanent or dramatic. It's part of this giant process that's happening. So they have a bigger perspective of life. When you're operating from that higher perspective, even things that used to be seem to be things you couldn't handle are become more beautiful. Like you wouldn't choose them, you wouldn't inflict them on other people, but they're also beautiful when they do happen.
mm. Do you think that that's hard for some people to imagine being in that place? Like, do you think that's a hard, like a big leap for a lot of people?
Totally. Um, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who listen to this and will have an immediate response of, yeah, sure, but what about X? What about
Right.
Y? But this is obviously horrible. This is obviously
Right.
an objectively terrible thing. Like, how could you even insinuate that that is okay?
Hmm.
And that is the degree to which they will be suffering innocently.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really great because that's what I see too, is that there's this way that it's really hard to to I see things the way that you're describing very much, that I can see that like life is so I have moved to this place where life doesn't need to fit a certain definition of like these things are categorized as good and these things are categorized as bad. It's like the flow of life itself, the flow of life itself, and knowing that life includes death and disappointment. Life includes struggle and joy. It includes it all, right? It includes that. That's where the shift has come for me, is that I'm able to hold that, like the flow of life is what is so beautiful. It's the idea that I don't even know what is emerging, and then like how can I be with what's emerging, and how can I actually find the beauty in that. um how do you articulate that, like in your experience? How has it been for you, and how have you gotten there?
It doesn't even feel like I ever really arrive, but I've noticed some patterns about consciousness that have been really helpful. Um, really getting that whatever level I'm at feels completely true.
Mm,
And when I'm in the middle of being like triggered or frustrated or scared or worried about something, the experience is so real. And uh, so a lot of it is self-compassion for that, and compassion for others who are in that, knowing that trying to point above that level will just be taken as being mean or not getting it. So being able to meet myself in that place, meet other people in that place, and also like recognizing with experience that later on I feel totally fine, and I realize that at that period of time I was just lost in my thinking.
mm,
uh, like, and my circumstances haven't changed and I feel better and I can see more, like realizing that will pass, but recognizing the flavor of what it's like to be caught up in my thinking.
mm,
Because like when I'm more and more caught up in my thinking, if everything feels more serious, everything feels more urgent, everything feels more personal, everything feels more black and white. It's a lot more right and wrong. And like, this has to be fixed. This is a terrible problem, has to be fixed right away. And no one understands. And I have to like try really hard, or it's just like it's completely useless. And I'm just a total victim. But later on, she's like, oh yeah, I was just totally freaking out right there. It's actually fine.
Totally.
Independent of circumstances changing.
Yeah.
And it's like, when I recognize that that's what happens, and that when I'm in that mental note of like, okay, yeah, I'm just caught up right now, I probably should not be making any decisions right now.
Right.
I shouldn't, like, don't believe whatever I'm thinking.
Mm.
Like, there's this terrible belief in, for example, like in relationships, that like when they have the fight and they start saying the nasty things, it's like, oh, now the truth comes out, like as if that's like what's really going on. It's like, no, that's when you're further from the truth of the relationship. That's
Mm.
where you're deeper into your own head and just making stuff up and freaking out around it. It's less true
Mm.
the more you're caught up in your thinking, the more you're in the lower consciousness you're at. And if you sort of recognize the flavor of it, it doesn't mean that you can make it go away. You can't just like wave a wand of like, oh, I feel great now. Sometimes you can nudge up a little bit with some practices, but more powerful than that is realizing it's just not true.
Mhm. That's amazing, actually, because that's the way. There are a couple things that you did that were really helpful. One is, I am appreciating that you didn't make wrong the being in that state. Even, but you also acknowledge that our thinking is perhaps a little off, and that maybe we don't want to believe our thoughts in that time. And we also want to bring in the ability to remember that we'll probably feel better in a little while, as the circumstances don't change, but our state of mind changes, our state of being changes.
Mhm.
Right. So that's fascinating. I think that's fascinating I think you're really good at taking it and really breaking it down into those pieces, rather than I think there's a way that we can just go by it fast and just, oh yeah, 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 like we get triggered and then we move on. And that's not really, there's something about slowing that down a little bit here and saying, but no, actually, this thing does happen. We're not judging that happens. In fact, we have compassion for that happens. And also, let's not take any action in that time. Let's not send emails. Let's not let's not post on Facebook. Let's, you know,
Yeah. Like,
yeah,
it's not the time to suddenly abandon all of your good habits. It's not time to leave the relationship. It's not time to quit the job when you are most triggered.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
probably time to just follow the directions that you gave yourself when you were coming from a higher level of consciousness.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I remember even when my husband and I were in a really, really hard time in our marriage, and um, I think I was actually triggered for months. Like, I was not in a regulated state of my body. And I remember going on my phone and searching for midlife crisis, because I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, what is going on with me? Is this a midlife crisis? And I remember the first thing that it said was, this is a time to not make any changes. Don't take any action. Don't do anything.
Yeah, like the emotions, or at least like the negative emotions, are a feedback mechanism. It doesn't mean what it feels like it means. Like, it doesn't mean that you're being attacked, or that you're in the wrong relationship or wrong career, or you're going down the wrong path. It means, stop. You're overthinking it. You're
Yeah.
freaking out. Like, when you settle down, you will feel better.
Yeah.
And then you'll have a much more intelligent sense of what to do next.
Right. 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 It's like such powerful, um, it's like powerful advice to give people, because I think people I think that the one thing I see is that there are still so many people who believe that triggers are to be ashamed of, like that it's like wrong or bad, instead of understanding that everyone gets triggered,
Mhm.
and then we all have our different ways that we act that out in the world. And ideally we stop acting it out. ideally ideally we can notice and we can pay attention to our body and then not act it out, but nonetheless we all do. And so it's normalizing that we all we do get triggered, but then breaking it down in this way is just so, I think it's so powerful to say, like, don't believe what you're thinking in those moments.
Yeah, and I'm realizing as you're using the words, like I almost never use the word trigger anymore. Um, I think it's a really good training wheel
Yep.
because sort of like diagnoses in therapy, like a trigger, because there's that initial acknowledgement and realization is like, oh, when someone does something like this happens within me. And I've got this association. Here's like where it came from. But also, the more that you think you have a trigger, as if there's like some like physical trigger that's been attached to you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like there, and you have to work around it, live with it. There's the risk of reifying it as if it were a real thing,
Yep.
because patterns tend to resolve on their own once there's clarity around them.
Yeah.
When you recognize them as something that's made up of thought rather than something that's like physical and real and there. Like if you died and there was a biopsy or autopsy, they wouldn't find the triggers.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, she was afraid of snakes. It
Yes,
wouldn't be
exactly.
there.
It's another trap of certainty, though. It's
Mm-hmm.
another trap because it's like, oh, well, now I know my pattern. And there's some way that, like, oh, I can like know my pattern and then that's predictable. And then I can control it. And uh, I'll just say for me, the way that I do it is that I don't actually do that. I just notice when something does get activated in me and I'm in that state, then I'm thankful for another opportunity to see a place that's not been integrated within me. But I don't spend a lot of time being able to define my triggers. Like I see people spending a
Yeah.
lot of time defining their triggers and knowing what they are. And then, but then I think that what happens is sometimes they spend their life trying to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. So they just start putting themselves in a smaller and smaller box,
A smaller.
like trying to define themselves more and more and more. And it's like, okay, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. I have this problem. I can't do this. I can't do that. Um, yeah, like there's a little bit of freedom in recognizing them, but once you're starting, if you use it as an excuse to limit yourself
Mm,
rather than an opportunity to see beyond triggers, to see like intelligence underneath,
mm,
the infinite resilience and creative energy underneath, because I think growth work should lead towards recognizing the infinite within you rather than a more and more finely defined ego.
right. 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 So that's kind of the difference between there's a way that I think people can become very self-aware. And then that is runs the risk of becoming a fixed identity.
Yeah. It's like self-aware and self-conscious being like two totally different directions.
Mm, mm,
Even though English-wise they're synonymous.
yeah. How would you define them differently?
I think of self-conscious as um, oh, like I'm this and this and this. I'm this Enneagram number. I'm this personality type. I have these triggers. I'm okay with these things. I'm not okay with these things. I'm this type of person.
Hmm.
Like adding like more and more labels. Um, and that's a level. Like there's a lot of levels where much worse than that, because that creates a lot of clarity. And when people are in chaos and they don't know why they're behaving certain ways, like when you first realize that there's a name for what you've been suffering from for decades, it's such a relief. It's actually really empowering. It gets you somewhere. But then it's really important to let it go in order to keep on growing.
Yeah.
Self-awareness, that's recognizing that you're not any of those things. It's that inquiry into, well, if I'm not this label, if I'm not that label, if I'm not my name, if I'm not my job, if I'm not this body, if I'm not any of these things, then what am I? And that's more recognizing that you are awareness, aware of itself,
Mm,
and that it's universal awareness. Like that's that access to oneness that we all are. And that's the source.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for saying though the part that this is a that there are places where people navigate to that are really healthy and good along their journey. I remember when I learned my Enneagram type,
Mhm.
and it was so freeing for me because I was able to it was part of my self-love journey. It was part of me coming into acceptance of parts of me that I had been maybe rejecting or not acknowledging,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a step along the journey for me that was necessary.
Yeah. And I love the Enneagram. I think one of the things that really helped that I learned pretty early on when I was studying Enneagram is that Enneagram it's not a type. Like you're not your Enneagram number. It's a habit of what it looks like when you're not being yourself.
Mm,
Like if yourself was like at the top, it's sort of like which route down the mountain do you fall?
mm-hmm.
And there's the one path down, there's the two paths down. But as you become healthier and healthier in your type, you get closer to who you actually are, and you become less and less identifiable as what number you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't they say that actually when you do your Enneagram testing that you really should be doing it from when you're in your late teens and 20s, because you really should be doing it from your less evolved place and from the motivation behind what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you try to do it when you're like, say, if you tried to do it right now, you'd more likely be a much more balanced across all types,
Mm-hmm.
because you become less definable.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's also reminding me of like parts work, like internal family systems,
Mm-hmm.
where there's so much emphasis on defining the parts. Sometimes it can be you can forget that there's the self there, which is the
Mm-hmm.
resource that has the parts magically be seen, held, connected with, heal, integrate. When you realize that you're all this, that you are the self, parts just naturally start to integrate. You don't. It suddenly doesn't need to be a lot of cataloging and a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. So, how would a person who does parts work? So, I really feel that way too, and I really love parts work. I actually think it's really
Mhm.
fascinating work. But again, I handle parts work like I've handled triggers over the years, which is that I let them emerge. So
Mhm.
I definitely am of the mind um, that there is a path, and life is guiding me. It's like I'm in the river of life, or on a trail, and there are these breadcrumbs, and I get to if I flow with life, then the breadcrumbs just unfold in front of me, and I don't really need to know that I don't have to go looking way far out. I can actually just be like, oh well, wow, like I just got triggered by something. Awesome. That's like a place for me to then explore. And I get to then go deeper into that. But I don't have to be looking for triggers. I don't have to be thinking about being triggered. I don't have to be avoiding anything. I'm just kind of letting it flow and knowing that there is some intelligence that is inviting me to become more and more myself, more and more connected, more and more, I don't know, awake. I don't even know what I'm becoming because it's really not that important to me anymore. More integrated. And same with parts work. Like a lot of times a trigger brings up a part in me that wants to be that wants to be heard and seen. I don't have to go looking for the parts that aren't seen. Those are sort
Mhm.
of, they're just happening for me. Do you feel like that's true for you? Like how have you experienced this idea that you don't have to be like cataloging and defining?
Yeah, and one of the things I'm playing with, because I study different schools that say different things here, so it's a live inquiry for me, is whether we need to go into our stuff at all.
Mm,
Because there's a lot of schools where it's implied that like you need to do the work, like you can't just ascend, you can't just be in self and in this space, and you can't just be following the breadcrumbs and being following wisdom. You have to do your work as it comes up. So there's definitely not wallowing in your work, but it also has me wondering, because in other schools, um, when you're really connected to that genius, that intelligence, and you're following it, um, the stuff that comes up, it's sort of like those. It's sort of like when we were talking about when feeling fear. It's not a sign that you need to do anything, or that it means something, or that you need to do any processing. It's a sign that you're a little distracted right now,
mm,
and you don't need to be thinking what you're currently thinking. And if you think you need to do a little bit more work on it, it's starting to reify that thinking.
mm,
Like there's the opportunity to be immediately free of something by realizing that it doesn't need to be addressed because it isn't real.
mm. Wow.
And for a lot of people, that's totally sacrilegious. That's um, it's like, no, it's real. You have to slowly release it. It's there as if it were like a physical reality.
Mm,
And for a lot of people, that is the experience that it will be. Sometimes it will be a really slow process. But a lot of my inquiry over the last couple of years has been the realizing that we are so much closer to our internal infiniteness power than we think we are, and that our problems that we think came from the past and are seem to be really persistent, and that we think are going to take a really long time and a lot of work to release or to move through. Um, it's all held together by thought.
yeah.
One of the examples I love to share that's like starts to point in this direction for people, because it's actually scientifically based. There's a researcher in Stanford, Kelly McGonigal, who and she did a TED talk and wrote a book about this. She was a stress researcher for a while, so she was out there really emphasizing how toxic it is to have stress. It's like all the health, like all the ways that it's really unhealthy for you, and helping people calm down, helping people not feel stress. Then she realized through one of the studies that she encountered, it's like actually she was like a little bit off there.
Mm,
In this study, they performed this test in order to stress out the participants of the study. And the variable that they changed is for one of the groups. Actually, like for one of the groups, they said they prefixed it with how bad stress is. Like stress is deadly. Stress can kill you. It's going to cause all these things. And it's like, now let's do an experience to stress you out. And with another group, they gave, I think it was like a 10 to 15-minute talk about stress being good for them, like stress being a call to rise to the occasion.
mm,
And so when they did the tests, the people who, obviously the people who thought it was bad, they felt bad, bad things were happening chemistry wise. For the people who were taught that it was good, this is just 10 to 15 minutes, they still had cortisol, but they also released some other hormones in order to have the experience of excitement.
mm.
Like their blood vessels actually changed. Like in the one group, the blood vessels constricted, so very little blood was getting through. So they were like bracing. Like their physiology was bracing for impact. The other group was like, yes, okay, cool, let's go. And an interesting thing, that second group that was taught that stress is a good thing, like they had health benefits throughout the rest of their life as well from a 10-minute talk.
Wow.
Like not just for that test. It wasn't even just the short-term thing, just the idea that stress was a good thing actually had them become healthier. So actually the group that, so I think there were other studies where people who were taught that stress was good and experienced a lot of stress in their life were slightly healthier than people who didn't experience stress in their life. So Kelly's realization is that before, stress was like the number 4, number 5 killer. It was like the most deadly thing. Turns out it's not stress it's the killer. It's stress beliefs. It's the
Hmm.
belief that stress is harmful to you.
Hmm.
And that's fascinating. That starts to like crack the door open. How many things that we think just are like, even physiologically or in terms of like how the brain works, the things that we just think are scientifically true are actually about the thought about the thing.
That's really cool. Yeah, you know, it's so funny you bring up when I was in therapy with my husband, and she was doing a lot of this work around this, and we were doing a lot of Byron Katie stuff and everything. But I remember talking about that I had an issue that I love sugar, and I was like, "Ah, I'm trying really hard to cut sugar out of my life, and granted, I'm not denying that that's possibly something that's a very good idea, and I'm still working on it. However, what she said that was so funny. She just looked at me and she said, it's all about what you think. She said, so if you think sugar is bad for you, it's going to be bad for you. If you think sugar isn't bad for you, and if you think it's good for you and it's actually going to help you in some way, that's what it's going to be. And I was like, what? And it's like, like there goes a moment in my life that, you know, to this day, I try to remember that. Like I try not to say to my kids things like, you guys don't eat sugar because it's bad for your immune system. I try hard to not say things like that because I don't want to imprint upon them this idea that they should be worried when they eat something, you know, or that they should be, or did you notice that when you don't sleep, you get sick? Like, I was like, oh, I don't want to put that in their heads, that the idea that that's possible, you know, and yet I want them to be healthy and I want them to make healthy choices. So,
Yeah, it's like, how do you like tell them the scientifically verifiable stuff, like according to like it's very much scientifically seems like that sugar is really bad for you, but how much of it being bad for you is the thought that it's bad for you?
yeah.
um that's fascinating, and it's probably really helpful to align your reality with what you're thinking, so that
Yeah.
if you happen to be eating a lot of sugar, it might be good to not be thinking that it's hurting your health. like
Right.
this is poisonous for me as I'm eating it, whatever it is that you're eating. Like that's probably not good for you.
Right.
um and yet, I mean, I would still recommend for most people, like, if, yeah, maybe you lean away from the sugar. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
But it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't think I know the answer, but I do think that this is a great inquiry and a great conversation because it's probably holding both to be true. So
Mhm.
it's like what I try to help people, and I try to live my life this way, that, you know, in general, I do know that things are mostly my thoughts. I do know that. Like I know that if I'm walking down on the bike path and someone ignores me that I know, and it looked like she looked at me and then looked away, I have choices at that point. I could definitely go in and make up a story that she must be mad at me. Did I do something wrong? Why is she ignoring me? Or what is wrong with her? She's a snob. She doesn't. I could make up those stories, but I joke and I tell people, make up the lovely story. That's what I tell people, make up the lovely story because it's all made up anyway. And since
Mhm.
you're making it up anyway, make up the one that won't cause you to suffer. You, you
Mhm.
know, because it's like you're just causing unnecessary suffering. Or pick up the phone and get the truth of what's going on with her. You know, get to the truth of what's happening for her.
Yeah, I love that. Because it can be easy for someone to argue, like if you say it's all made up, it's like, oh well, so everything's meaningless. Sort of go the nihilistic route, which is also making up something about it. But when you realize it's made up, you also realize like you're the storyteller.
Mm.
Like you're the one who's crafting how to describe to yourself what this is. And we don't know, like it doesn't mean that we're, it's not magical thinking. It's not that we have control. It's not that you can make yourself healthy, but it's also acknowledging that we have no idea how much influence we have.
Mm.
And we might as well like lean towards something that feels good and seems to be working in alignment with nature and the world. And we can tell when it's not jiving with nature. We can tell when we're like thinking positively about something, or we're just trying to like cast it or try to control it with positive thinking, and it's not quite working.
Right.
And as this gets more advanced, like you really start to wonder, like I don't like, there does seem to be magic, but not in the control kind of way that we used to think about magic.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that, the differentiation between like that we know we have influence, but it's not necessarily control. And how do you choose those thoughts that, that acknowledge that there is some influence that we're having?
Yeah, like I'm not a fan of manifestation. Like I'm going to think about this thing, I'm going to dream about this thing, imagine myself having it so that I can get it. But there's also something to, if you're thinking in a certain direction, if you're really excited about something, and you're in alignment with reality, like you're in alignment with what's going on around you, you'll start to notice opportunities. You'll start to notice like little hints, those breadcrumbs start showing up, and they start showing more often. And sometimes it gets spooky how many synchronicities you have in your life. Like, this is awesome. Whoa, cool. I was just thinking about that. It's like, this is that opportunity I've been dreaming about. Okay, I mean, yes. So that tends to happen, but it doesn't feel like we're the one doing it.
Hmm.
I think is the difference. It doesn't feel like the ego, the part that wanted it or that felt like it needed it. It doesn't feel like you're making it happen. It's almost like you're asking and things are happening. And because you're going with it, it tends to get better and better and better as you go.
Mm. Yeah, well, and isn't it possible that, um, I mean, I don't fully understand this, and you're helping to push me down like a little bit more. You're helping me to expand my thinking around like how I feel about manifestation as a concept first, and this kind of magical thinking, but yet the idea that it actually is, there is this way that things do align for us when we are aligned with life. I mean, I think one of the questions I have about it is that I think that, like, what if we were to look at it like this? Like, when we're spending a lot of time thinking about things that are sort of an external view, like, oh, I wish I was doing that. Like, that person has that life and that person has this. And what we're doing is we're not really living the life that we're put here to live. And when we're more aligned with living the life that we're here to live, naturally things would line up because we're we're doing what is like our purpose, or we're following the river of our life. And yeah, of course we're all interconnected, but I'm still a human being having a human experience, as well as, I think, an experience beyond me, beyond my physical being. I hate this stuff because I
Mm.
can never come up with the right language, but I know what I'm saying, and I'm like, I like you're I think you have a little more precision with your language because you've been thinking about this in ways that I haven't necessarily. So you can help to clarify my wording if it would help to make it more clear for other people.
Yeah. One way I sometimes describe it as life is magical, but it's not magic.
Hmm.
It's got that quality of the miraculous unfolding, where you're just sort of being invited to follow along for this amazing ride, versus magic, which is sort of the empowered mindset of like, I'm going to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course, like again, is a huge improvement from more of a victim mindset or a struggling mindset. That leap to like, oh, actually, I can do this myself. I can create my future. Then there's the more divine leap. It's like, oh, actually, something much greater and much smarter than me is trying to create something through me,
Mm-hmm.
and I just get to be along for the ride.
Mm. Yeah, that's probably a little bit more of what I feel like I've been experiencing as I get more clear on my own journey. But I do want to acknowledge, just like put us on the side a little bit, just acknowledge that I think that people who are earlier in their growth, and I don't know who is going to listen to this. I have a feeling that this video will be attractive for people who have been on their path for a while. But for those people
Mm-hmm.
who maybe are earlier and they're just intrigued by this, I also think that when I was earlier on my journey, there was part of me getting on my path was to have some of those things that I did to actually like heal, like the steps along the way. Like I wasn't listening to myself yet. And so I did do the work. I did have to, or maybe I didn't, but I thought I did. I thought I did. And when I was, there were many, many times when I didn't feel I could choose my thoughts. You know, like there were times when I felt like they were so powerful. And I literally didn't know that there was another thought I could choose. So I was just I just felt like I wanted to hold that a little bit with people, for people who might be like, wait a second, I can't do what you're talking about doing. I can't do that. That doesn't feel available to me. What are your thoughts around that?
Two very different thoughts. Um, One, I'll just sort of like expand a little bit on this thread we've already been on, but then I'll spend more time on something that might feel more accessible. The first one is, that's still on this train. What if it actually is that simple? Um, just holding the possibility that it might be incredibly simple, just incredibly elusive. And there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of work that it doesn't have to be that hard. What if? So that's more of a tease, because what I have seen, like one of the things that from Sid Banks, who I follow and teaches has taught a lot about this, is that we're only one thought away from a
Mm-hmm.
completely different experience of life.
Yeah.
So like that's the first one, and the other one is, the universe is really smart. Like it's so much smarter than we are. Uh, we have also a great capacity to be really stubborn and to ignore what's going on, to try to control things and conceptualize things. So the universe will just keep on offering up other opportunities. Like if you're resisting something, suddenly you'll get sick. It kind of looks like this coronavirus thing is like one of the next stage. Like, okay, they're still not listening. Here you go. It's like we're going up to like this DEF CON now.
Yeah.
How about now? And if we come out of this and haven't learned anything, like something else will probably come around, or the same thing will come around. It's like, what about now?
Yeah.
So it might be the inquiry of like, okay, to what degree are you resisting something that's
Mm.
trying to happen? So it goes back to like the something is trying to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll just keep on coming up with things. Like when someone has emotions that they're denying are there and they're stuffing it down, it might come out sideways as health issues. It might come out sideways as other people around you all having that emotion that you're refusing to feel yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, it's really fascinating how processes work. They're weird and they're non-local, and but they keep on trying.
Yeah.
So chances are, if you're struggling, there's something around you that's been trying to give you a hint for a long time, but you're not listening, or you believe that that's not okay to look in that direction or go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
or just against a firmly held belief that you have about how the world is or how you are.
Mm-hmm.
But I really enjoy that, like, the energy is intelligent and it just keeps on finding ways to try.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I knew when I even said what I said, there was a part of me that didn't even want to speak it, because I do believe that I want to believe that that it is available to everyone. Like, just because my path was harder, that might be because I was super stubborn and I was just being, or the other thing I think is possible is that we do keep on, um, as a whole, our consciousness is expanding. And so therefore, what might not have been available, or I didn't think it was available for me 12 years ago, or whenever I started on my path, it might be available to people. Like, we might have a new consciousness around this. And so other people might be able to have the one thought in a way that I didn't think it was available for me at the time. So I just
Uh,
wanted to, you know what I mean? Like, there's
yeah, like I certainly hope that it doesn't take as long for other people as it took for me to
me too. That's what I'm
get to
thinking
this
too.
level. I've been doing personal development work for, I don't know, like 16 or so years is my guess. Yeah, like I want it to take much less than that for people.
Yeah.
And if, like, for some people, I've had just one conversation and all of a sudden, like, everything turns around for them
Yeah.
and they're good.
Yeah.
Um, and also there's some people where I'll talk to them, it's like, and I see the perfection underneath, but they're totally not ready yet because there's just like so much stuff. So there's the art of being with human beings who don't know that they are spirit having a human experience,
Yeah.
and being totally okay with them being in the illusion of that, the maya of that, the game of that.
Mm-hmm.
um and being okay with they never see that. But the more we see that for ourselves, the more everyone makes sense and the easier it is for us to connect with everyone, and the more naturally we just kind of radiate just well-being. People feel better around us.
Mm-hmm.
People just settle down and have more insights and like, oh, actually, like, they're just around us, like, oh, it doesn't seem so bad now. We're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, I guess I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And like, the more we're connected to our inner light, the more others start recognizing the light within themselves, whether they like it or not. Like, it might be mysterious, like, why do I feel good? This
Mm.
doesn't make sense because I'm in a bad situation.